everyone, welcome back to another video where today we are going to be taking a look at the overnight viewing figures for Doctor Who Season 2 Episode 5, The Story and the Engine, and viewing figures actually saw a slight increase overnight from last week, and we're going to be getting into that and why I think that could be the case. But before we get into it, do me a teeny tiny little favour, click that subscribe button. It would be very much appreciated. We're trying to get to 30,000 subscribers by the end of the year, and we cover regular Doctor Who content here on the channel. I mean, it'd be even better if we could get 30,000 by the end of the series, but I'm not convinced of that one yet, but we'll see. Ratings. Doctor Who sees slight increase for latest episode, The Story and the Engine, on another quiet night for BBC One. Doctor Who continued on BBC One on Saturday 10th of May with The Story and the Engine, which scored overnight audience of 1.59 million, the consolidated rating, which will include iPlayer devices, and catch-up will be released 19th of May. Overall, it was the BBC's fourth highest rated primetime programme of the day, outside of the news. It was also a night where the BBC failed to break 2 million mark in primetime, with ITV dominating, with Britain's Got Talent and the 1% Club. So again, a very crucial fact here, this is another night where the BBC failed to crack 2 million at all. So when you factor that in, Doctor Who doing 1.59 is pretty good, especially when you consider that that doesn't also include the 12-hour pre-broadcast viewers either. When you include those, it's probable that Doctor Who actually would get a slight bump compared to everything else. But of course, as I've explained before, the overnight viewership for Doctor Who is slightly kneecapped by the fact that it's available 12 hours prior. I won't be surprised if this gets ditched when the show moves forward, with or without Disney, frankly. I mean, the fact that they're already doing it for the finale this year, going back to a traditional broadcast time with no kind of pre-iPlayer viewing, suggests to me kind of contrition that Doctor Who doing the streaming model just doesn't quite work, and it is designed as a TV show first. I mean, quite frankly, I don't know how it did on Disney+, but the 60th aired at the normal time, at around 7 PM, and I don't remember anyone ever saying that that was inconvenient for Disney Plus viewers. I don't know, but I wouldn't be surprised if that finale is one of the strongest viewing figures of the series. I guess you could say that a lot of the fans will be watching it in cinemas, but that's not necessarily a bad thing for the BBC either. Yeah, if we go back to yesterday, we can see that Doctor Who was up against the Britain's Got Talent semi-final. I still don't know why Doctor Who is being put up against Britain's Got Talent. It just seems like a losing battle to me to put it up against what is the one thing that still pulls in decent numbers on, like, British TV. And when I say decent numbers, I mean decent numbers within the 2020s context. If you actually look at last week, the highest overnight figure on all of TV for Britain was Britain's Got Talent with 3.74, and that was the highest. Now, 10 years ago, that would be seen like an absolute disaster for Britain's Got Talent, but now that's the peak of television. So when you consider that Doctor Who's hovering around, sort of 1.52 million overnights, it kind of puts into perspective that, like, it's not doing it anywhere near as bad as, like, people are suggesting it is. Do I think that it could be doing better? Yes, I've said this before, but when you actually compare it to where the rest of the market is, it's not, like, way, way behind, especially when you include pre-broadcast viewers as well, which is obviously not an issue programmes like Britain's Got Talent have to deal with. But I think another good sign when it comes to this viewing figure is that it's proof that the viewing figures for Doctor Who Season 2 are remaining pretty consistent. We haven't seen really a major drop-off this series at all. It's all hovering around that 3 million mark. I mean, Episode 4, obviously, we're waiting on the consolidated figure for that. I imagine that will come in just under 3 million, but probably not by much. It's probably going to be like 2.92 or something like that in the end, which again, is not really a huge drop when you actually look at it. Like, the numbers are remaining, remarkably, like, consistent. It's all around kind of 1.5 to 2 million overnights, and then about, 3 million-ish in the consolidated, which, while I think they will definitely have wanted higher, I've said before, I would like to be seeing, kind of closer to maybe 4 million consolidated with maybe 2.5 million overnights or something like that, which would still be lower than Britain's Got Talent, but would be, stronger than it is now. I still think the fact that about 3 million people are consistently tuning in for Doctor Who week to week to week is a good sign in the sense that it's not really, like, hemorrhaging. Do you know what I mean? It's like, I feel like we found the flaw with Doctor Who now, where 3 million consolidated is about the audience that can be expected to tune into Doctor Who pretty much no matter what. Again, I do think these numbers would be slightly increased by just a better time of year and not being placed right opposite Britain's Got Talent in the overnights. But, as I said, while I think they would definitely be hoping for more, the fact that it remains solid and, like, isn't really, like, going down a huge amount is a good sign. And I actually think that, provided that Episode 6, the Interstellar Song Contest, goes out when they want it to, i.e. in between the FA Cup and Eurovision, that could be a pretty big boost for Doctor Who. Obviously, that is dependent on whether the football goes into extra time or not. Hopefully it doesn't, because otherwise they won't have time for both Eurovision and Doctor Who in the schedule, and of course Eurovision being live will likely cause Doctor Who to be booted probably to BBC Two, which hopefully that doesn't happen, because that would result in a substantially lower figure. But I wouldn't be surprised now if that does go to plan, Episode 6 has a pretty big boost, and then the finale being a regular, like, simulcast with everyone at, like, the same normal time at around 7 o'clock, will also likely lead to a slight boost in the finale as well. So I think, to be honest, we've hit the floor with probably Lucky Day is probably going to be the lowest that this series goes, is my assumption at this point, because every other episode coming up probably will see a little bit of a boost, in my opinion. Could be wrong, that's just my guess, based on what we know with how the rest of the series is releasing. Again, we have no idea how it's performing on Disney+, and that is really what we are waiting to find out, you know, whether this Disney deal gets re-upped or not. But even if it's not, I think, yeah, 3 million probably isn't quite the amount of people they want to be seeing it, but creating a show consistently for an audience of 3 million, there are shows that they create that get renewed for multiple seasons that get way less than that. Yes, they cost less than Doctor Who, but you can reduce the cost of Doctor Who. There are ways you can do that. You can do an Earthbound series, you could do series of specials, you could do more kind of base Under Siege type stuff. There's ways in which you could definitely lower the budget to justify that. You know, you could do a 5 or 6 episode run. There's ways and means to lower the budget for the audience that's reflected, especially if Disney do, you know, drop out. I don't think that at this level it makes sense for them to completely drop it, because at the end of the day it's still pulling in a consistent, if not at the heights of where they want it to be, audience. It's not like it's gone from 3 million at the start of this series to now, like, at this point in the series, we're down to, like, 2 million consolidated. It's very, very consistent. And as I said, if you look at the rest of the industry, nothing on the BBC hit 2 million this night, so that means that between 4th and 1st place for the BBC was a matter of a couple 100,000, which, again, is probably, you know, even less when you consider the pre-broadcast figures for Doctor Who. So yeah, I mean, overall, again, it's like, you know, it's not going to be like a massive increase, you know, I'm not going to say, oh my god, Doctor Who's doing fantastically, Doctor Who is back. But I think the fact that it's consistent is good. Like, we're not seeing people watch an episode and get, like, really turned off, if that makes any sense. If you actually look at this series, the people who are watching seem to be coming back, is the general kind of picture that this paints for me. I reckon 3 million is roughly about, you know, where we're going to bottom out, maybe slightly lower for Lucky Day. Which, yeah, I mean, it's not ideal, but it's also not the worst thing in the world. I feel like I'm rambling a bit, but I mean, look, at the end of the day, only the BBC can really decide, you know, what number is enough for them to keep the show going, but we have to bear in mind that there are other factors to keeping Doctor Who on the air. You know, it's still a big merchandising hub for the BBC in general, the magazine Big Finish, you know, t-shirts and figures and all that sort of stuff that just no other BBC show really has going for it. Combine that with it being one of the only things that they have that still appeals to a relatively young demographic, I still don't think it's going anywhere. And the fact that Season 2, while yes, has probably not performed as well as they would like it to have done in an ideal world, the fact that we haven't either seen a major drop from Season 1, if you look at Season 1, obviously it started around 4 million, but it was kind of hovering around that 3 million for the rest of the series, and then obviously if you look at Season 2, 3 million is kind of where it's consistently sort of hovering in terms of the consolidated. It implies that there is a consistent audience coming back to watch this, and that audience is probably a somewhat likely audience to engage in other parts of the brand, buy merchandise, stuff like that, which is still a relatively lucrative thing for the BBC. As I've said, you know, they're doing a cinema screening for the finale. If there wasn't a demand for stuff like that, they wouldn't be doing it. So while yes, stuff like Death in Paradise is doing like better, for example, Death in Paradise doesn't have the added kind of trump card of, okay, but it's also a brand and, you know, it sells merchandise and it also, you know, it's one of those things that everyone sort of knows. It's got that sort of ubiquitous nature to it. So I just don't think that it's going to be canned by them. I think maybe Disney will drop out. I've said this before. But I think that the BBC, no matter what, will try and find ways to keep it going for the next few years. Whether that is series of specials, whether that is a 5 to 6 episode run, whether that is, you know, maybe just a couple of Christmas specials or a gap year and then we get a full series. However they decide to do it, I just don't see a scenario where they go, we're going to bin this off now. It just doesn't really make any sense to me. Especially as well, part of me wonders if part of the reason why this series has been so consistently solid and hasn't seen much of a drop-off from its start is probably because this series, at least in the opinion of the majority it seems to be a step up from the previous one and seems to be pretty consistent in terms of its quality. I know that there are going to be people saying, I hated this episode and I hated that episode, but my point is, when you look at the critical reception of this series compared to last year, it definitely seems more praised across the board, and I do think that's probably reflected in the fact that we haven't really seen a major drop-off this year. Obviously, we can look at Season 2, which did better in the overnights, but for a lot of it, you know, it was kind of hovering around the same sort of areas for its consolidated numbers. Maybe a little bit higher, you know, more sort of in that kind of 3.5-ish territory, but it's not a massive, like, difference when you look at the two side by side. Like, it's fairly comparable, at least at this point. I'll be interested to see how episode 4 does, whether that does well on catch-up, and of course, the more important figures, arguably, are the 28-day figures in a streaming environment as well, and we know that Space Babies and Devil's Cord, I believe, consolidated to 6 million when you include, obviously, 28-day figures, so it really is a waiting game. I assume it won't be too long until we know the 28-day figures for the Robot Revolution, because that went out Saturday 12th, and it has been about a month since then. So it'd be interesting to see what the 28-day figures for Robot Revolution are, and particularly Lux is the one that I'm keeping an eye on, because that one has had a weird spike in like social media traction and everyone just kind of memeing on it and talking about it, so who knows where that'll go. But yeah, but let me know in the comments below what you guys think. As always, I think this comment section will be absolutely delightful. You know, say whatever you want. At the end of the day, you can have whatever opinion you want. You don't have to agree with me. You can disagree with me. As I've said before, I do think Doctor Who could be doing better in an ideal world, but I also don't think that these figures mean the apocalypse is upon us. I think you've got to look at it in context with everything else. Otherwise, you're just looking at a number and going number lower than it was 10 years ago, which could be applied to literally every other show in Britain at this point. As I said, 3 million overnights for Britain's Got Talent would have been seen as like apocalyptic 10 years ago. Now, that's seen as a rating success. You have to look at things with regards to where we're at now in the TV landscape and the other factors as to why Doctor Who keeps getting made, because we all know that the Whittaker era wasn't seen as like a massive success. We all know that that's the case, but it was still enough of a success for them to shop it around to streaming services and for Disney to be interested in it. So we have to kind of factor in that these numbers, as much as we all obsess over them, are not the only factor as to whether Doctor Who stays on the air or not. There are other metrics that they are probably looking at. There are other financial benefits to keeping Doctor Who on the air for the BBC. So yeah, we'll see what happens. If you did enjoy the video, be sure to give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.